Robert Nozick was a 20th century philosopher who posited a thought experiment to test the viability of hedonism as a philosophical point of view and as a lifestyle. The experience machine, as it's called, is a hypothetical device one could plug into which, in lieu of reality, one would experience permanent pleasure without knowing that they are in a simulation. With the consequence of their choice being irreversible, one is then asked if plugging into said machine is a prudent decision or not. While I would argue that the fatal flaw of this hypothetical is that it doesn't take into account how people actually make major life choices, seeing as how people tend to experiment and test before deciding which house to buy, university to attend, or spouse to marry, that isn't the focus of my introduction. This thought experiment, the topic of hedonism, and free will were the focus of my English class in which I was teaching a young Chilean doctor. After introducing a set of 10 advanced level vocabulary words, the next exercise was a discussion task where she was supposed to implement the words in conversation. Her and I made it to the third conversational question, which asked flatly, "What do you think about hedonism? Do you think pursuing pleasure is the most important thing in life?" Her answer was well put together, though with a few grammatical errors. She replied that essentially, no. Seeking pleasure was not the penultimate purpose of our existence, but that being happy is. I then asked her if most of the things that make us happy are also pleasurable. She replied yes, but happiness as a state of being and the pursuit of pleasure as an objective are two different things inherently. That statement struck me as true yet simultaneously contradictory. How could one achieve happiness if they never pursued pleasure? Could a life without pleasure be truly considered happy by the one who lived it? Is happiness somewhere on a scale between how much pleasure we accept and how much we reject? I hope this makes sense because the question I'm going to work through today is this. While many of us would say the pursuit of pleasure is not the end-all be-all of life, is there anything done or experienced by people willingly that is not an implicit or explicit attempt to be pleased? I guess the question is similar to if any act of kindness could ever truly be altruistic in nature, seeing as how pleasure, coincidentally, can be derived from even the most selfless of acts. Yet I think the question is qualitatively different because in the question of if any pursuit could be done without the objective of pleasure possible is a question that is solely dependent on ourselves, while the question of our altruism can't lay claim to this because it relates to us and our interactions with the world. Let's start here. Is there a difference between being pleased and being happy? One could say a person can be pleased eating their favorite meal while unhappy about their recent divorce. Some multiple states of emotion or feeling can exist at the same time. And if this person were able to reconcile with their ex-partner or find a new partner, we would reasonably assume that their happiness would increase. Short-term satisfaction, even that which is abundantly enjoyable, can't replace the permanent substantial feelings of contentment and happiness. One would assume most of us would rather give up a trivial thing that gives us fleeting enjoyment than substantial relationships or items with extreme emotional significance to us. But is there anything that makes us happy that doesn't also bring pleasure? Even giving birth, one of the most physically agonizing experiences our species endures, is followed by a flood of endorphins and serotonin that causes feelings of pleasure later on. And while postpartum depression for new mothers does exist, this is abnormal rather than the rule. I don't want to go through every possible situation people could have because that would be impossible. What I think would be better is for one to imagine any scenario a person could be in and ask this. Is it likely that this person would choose the option that would definitely lead to a less happy state of being for them? How likely is it, controlling for all other conditions? For example, is a person going to choose a job from company A, paying $100,000 a year, over company B, paying $200,000 a year, if nothing were essentially different between the two other than salary? Or, how likely is it that someone would buy the same car from another dealer for $7,000 more rather than purchasing it from the first broker for cheaper if no inherent difference exists between the two options other than price? Thought examples based on trade in the free market are the easiest to make, but one could apply the same question to matters of the heart or spirit. For instance, how likely is a person going to choose leaving a partner who annoys them slightly over staying with their partner who makes them happy most of the time? It's not likely. How likely is it that the Muslim, Christian, or Jew who has slight lapses in faith and is minusculely unsettled by certain traditional practices would commit apostasy and risk alienating a loving community that fulfills her needs for companionship? Not likely either. While some people might imagine themselves in these scenarios and say they would pick the least likely option, that's fine. The question is not posed to definitely determine what will happen in every situation, for that would be fortune telling, and I'm not a soothsayer. The question is, can pleasure be escaped as an outcome? If you are in the minority opinion that you would leave the slightly annoying spouse or lose your religion rather than staying in a loving relationship or keeping the faith, you are choosing the option that is more pleasurable for you because the annoyance you experienced outweighs the happiness received. If pleasure actually wasn't the main goal of your life, you would have chosen to stay in the relationship and tolerated the pain of the bothersome boyfriend. So, to return to my question of whether there is a difference between being pleased and being happy, I would argue yes. However, one could be pleased and unhappy, but never happy and not pleased. And why is that? Because our feeling pleased is a necessary outcome of any choice we make to maximize our happiness. Whether people want to admit it or not, our nature dictates us to follow the path we reasonably evaluate will lead us to a happier life. If this is due to evolutionary biology, I cannot say. Some people might bring up the instances of martyrs, those who have given up their lives for a greater purpose they believed in, and no measurable amount of pleasure can be quantified from their acts due to them not being alive to receive it. Once again, these are anomalies. And while many people revere the likes of Christ like figures, aspiring for martyrdom is a goal only a tiny sliver of people would ever desire. In conclusion, I believe accepting that we are living our lives tacitly hedonistically is valuable to coming closer to finding the true meaning of our lives. The big questions related to why we exist and what to do with this consciousness can never be reasonably addressed if we rationalize with dishonest auspices. And to answer the question of what I plug into Nozik's experience machine, I find it the most pleasurable to tell whoever is listening or reading this yes, and then ask you why I would. Thank you.